screw it. So this is Sorauren, the second engagement. This is the Battle of July 30th. The two armies have sat across from each other, and the French have started pulling out. Still leaves Riel behind as a rearguard. I don't know how interesting this is going to be, but my own my situation right now says to me, hey, you kind of would rather play another scenario of this than try to start another set of rules, even if it's something that you enjoy at this point. It just fits in better with my schedule. And my first thought was, hey, it's interesting, a rearguard action. How often do you see that? Most, you might see it in something like, I don't know, SPQR or something, where there's just so many scenarios eventually that they decide to show off some other things. But most systems give you the battle, the big battles, and that's it. Because there just isn't enough room to explore all the different, little skirmishes and tactical situations that might show up. This actually isn't that small, as you can see. That was one of the first things that I kind of looked at and said, well, if I've got 15, 20 units on a side, that's a pretty big force. However, the rules for this is the setup, more or less. The French are allowed to set up anywhere along this line. The English anywhere along this line. And the French goal is to get their units off this road. And that's pretty much it. Basically, each strength point they lose is negative victory points for them. Each strength point that they, or maybe it's each unit that they withdraw. No, I'm sorry. Each unit eliminated, each fully eliminated French unit is a penalty. And each unit that withdraws is a French victory. I think this is impossible for the French to lose. I doubt that there'll be any units that are lost. Even disorganized units that route off the map in that direction count as victory points for the French. But we'll see how it happens. In addition, there are no rules for the leaders being set up in this one. So I'm just going to neglect them completely and go with no command rules whatsoever. Not even the, hey, leaders have some effect on play here. There's going to be units versus units. And it's really a race. If the Brits can kind of block that road and they get to move first, the French have to fight their way through. So, we'll see. We'll see. Of course, conceivably, the French could just run away all game. No fatigue rules here because we don't have core organizations and whatever. And, I mean, fatigue is just going to cause units to break, which is probably not that terrible for the French. Although, if they break this way, and that is one of their lines of communication, they're screwed. They lose the points instead. So that's how units get lost, is if the Brits kind of push the French in that direction instead. I've put the this thing in a piece of plastic because it's holding up fine. It's just it's kind of a pain to clean. I think the plastic's going to be a pain to clean too, if I recall correctly. It has more to do with the China marker. I used to use pens. They clean up a little easier, I guess. So I may switch to a pen, a dry erase type marker. Guess that's about it. As I began England's and Portugal's starting movement, I realized I forgot something. I intended to mark off at the beginning of the scenario. The English, I think, start with 4 losses. It looks like they're all going to be on this side of the river. And the French start with 5. So I gotta, and you can assign them to whatever units you like. I'm not going to assign them to the artillery because the artillery kind of gets one good shot in, and then, well, in the French case, it gets one good shot in and that's it. I'm not sure what to do with the English artillery. I'm kind of holding back with the right flank here so that I could sweep down if the French start to escape and hit them from behind. But mainly I'm hoping to halt them here, obviously. English side of the first turn, we already have some units getting popped back. A few casualties. I'm not going to be tracking. There's no morale, no disorder for no army demoralization or any levels like that in that. This is just really can you get through to here? Now, the French can. They're going to take fire, but I can start pulling units out right away because I wasn't able to get a British unit all the way to here. So I think that's something I want to do. Yes, the town is kind of invulnerable, but I want to get as many points as I can off the board as quickly as possible, and then try to, defend this location as well as I can to keep channeling units off. As it stands right now, though, I'm able to clear out. I'll be taking some fire, but it's not a big deal. Game runs from 8 to noon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 9 full turns. That's what the rules said. I just wasn't able to do the math in my head. You can see the French have shifted most of their force here. These are units they pulled off. This is how I'm going to score it. These are units they pulled off the board. I'll put any units that get killed over there. Right now, French are doing pretty well, but they haven't secured this location. Maybe I wanted to leave a unit here rather than, or some units there, rather than pull them off the board, because now the Brits are going to be able to clog that road, and I can't just walk off this way, even though theoretically it doesn't seem any different, right? There's some kind of weird vortex here or something that prevents me from pushing forward that way. So it was a mistake not to clog this space with French units. Yeah, I don't see this as that particularly realistic a scenario, to tell you the truth. Any rearguard action probably would have headed this way. It wouldn't just say, yeah, we need to have the road right here. We can't scale some hills and maybe kind of move that across that. Yeah, it's terrible terrain, but nothing so terrible you can't march through it. And, this is probably the worst area and worst piece of terrain in the area, and you can march up it. And after 2 turns, we see that French play was an absolute mistake. 2 units lost, and now I'm bottled up here. I can't get out through that road, and I'm facing probable losses. This artillery up here has got a channel where it can shoot through. These guys are deploying. They're going to start trading shots. It doesn't matter how many Brits I lose, just so that I wipe out the French in quantities greater than they can get off the map. If I had had a French unit here, though, I could have channeled more units out during the French move, assuming that unit wasn't broken. Now, there is a possibility that the Brits could have knocked him out, but, not really, because even if I knock him out, unless I meleeed to get the hex, I wouldn't be in this hex with the Brits, because you can't charge an empty space. So as long as I had a unit here, even if the units got broken and driven off, they'd score here, as they did, as long as they weren't wiped out, and then other units would have a free hex there. Yeah, they'd have to walk through the gauntlet, but the gauntlet's not that big a deal. You'd probably break, and an equally valid choice of retreat from here is this way as much as that way. So, English managed to blow away a hole in the French sort of immediate line of advance that they really want to make. Problem is, I can't advance into it myself, which means the French will be able to get back in there, but they're going to take extra fire to get into that space, so they may not want to. It probably isn't worth it. This space is vitally important. This one, it may be a step towards it, but it's a sign of how bad the French situation is, and it's my mistake that there's now 2 hexes back from that location. But, well, it may not be that bad to take it, because taking fire into this hex isn't too bad. They only take the 4 table. The French faced some problems due to a defect in their line. It looked like they had an advantage, actually, because they were able to squish a skirmisher out here. But artillery fire, no, out here, where they could have gotten flanking attacks, artillery fire took out this hex, and now the Brits have the edge over there and might be able to start rolling up this side of things. And that might be pretty much the end of this scenario. You can see we're already 1 unit ahead, without the French having an easy exit route, I don't know if they have a way out. The English start to take advantage, and they're really pushing a hole into the French. The French are going to have a hard time getting out of there. This is going to be a tough withdrawal to pull out of that space. And, you know, if I make it out without routing, I'm still not in a great position. So, and this clump pretty much has to almost all escape for there to be a chance of victory. English beginning to rally their forces. This is kind of a cute scenario to just watch the mechanisms of the base game play out on this kind of rough terrain. Beyond being a training scenario, I mean, I like combine this with the Cav scenario. The Cav scenario over on, I think, Salamanca was, no, it wasn't Salamanca, it's the other battle. What is the first one? Ocaña. Between the two of them, they give you a lot of the feel for the game's core mechanisms. And then beyond that, then you can go and play out the bigger battles with whatever optional rules you want to play with. The optional rules really don't apply to these little guys. Although the Ocaña scenario doesn't give you a very accurate result if you let the Allied Cav be in command, essentially, which the basic rules do. And the French suffer pretty much a failure in getting out of here. And now you can see just left in a little cluster. The Brits have the opportunity to move into this space. It's worth doing from here. I think, you know, we could call this at this point. Look at the French casualties. It's all because I made an initial mistake, but that's okay. At least I'm getting somewhat of a historical result of a massacre happening at 10 a.m. and the situation's absolutely hopeless. I don't think the French are getting any more units off the ground, off the board in good order. Yeah, this doesn't mean these units are just destroyed, right? Units that are wiped out, well, for one thing, some of them may have retreated off the map, not on the road, which means they have a harder trip home. And, you know, probably all get there because they're the wrong nationality. But, you know, minus some attritional effects. But it also indicates just collapse of the unit, straggling, routing, etc., which means that the rearguard is failing in its job of getting out in good order to be able to protect the next stopping point, or the next point at which the British Army can catch up to the French Army. It means Rial's command is ineffective for that purpose, more than any kind of, oh yeah, wow, look at those casualties. And that's true with the battle too. You know, a unit that suffers, a unit probably is going to be destroyed in game terms if it suffers 30 to 50% casualties. So, you know, when you see lots of dead units, that doesn't mean you've wiped out the forces. You might see some surrenders, though, in certain circumstances. So if this wasn't against the edge of the map where there's an escape route actually available, if you see surrounded forces, those might be big bags of captured troops happening. I don't think we've seen anything that really applies to that here, except maybe that little place in here where one force had trouble getting out of there. I don't think there's anything more I can possibly learn here. The next turn, the English basically wiped out the French. We got 2 more units left, but they're already disordered. They're not getting anywhere. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, they had a morale check. They have a chance of recovering. Strangely, I think maybe I'm making a mistake there. If so, it affected my last game at least as well. I think you're allowed to make a morale recovery. Yeah, there's no restriction on where you are when you recover. I have forgotten about the Cav auto disorder. The Cav auto disorder that they can take voluntarily. They get to recover that immediately, and I've forgotten that completely. But anyway, these guys did. One of them succeeds. That means this actually has to fall off the map, you know, to be another destroyed unit. We're just not, there's no way the French can hold out. And secondly, even if they could break this unit through in some dramatic sort of manner, which they can't, they've lost the scenario. And there's really nothing terribly interesting left to look at here. This is not a scenario I really like the model. I don't like how it's being used to represent what's going on here. What you really want for something like this is more ground to fall back. And that's what I was hoping for. When I saw the numbers, I thought, well, maybe the French will be positioned somewhere, and maybe they'll be heading off this way where they had victory points to go at the end of the scenario. It didn't make a lot of sense, but maybe. This also didn't follow up my situation in this battle at all. And there's no translation. It would be kind of interesting to have oh, hey, you know, one side or the other, whichever side is deemed to have lost, maybe has to commit the withdrawal in some kind of scenario generator from the main battle to generate this as an option. So this really serves only one purpose, which is this is sort of a training scenario, a way to see the base system at play. And unfortunately, there's no real suggestion to use this one. I would suggest this as your first scenario, actually, if you're looking at this series, because it's an infantry-only scenario. Well, there's some artillery, but it's mainly an infantry scenario. It's got simple goals. There's not a lot of complexity to it. There's enough pieces to make it kind of interesting. The Cav scenario that I played first for Ocaña's first day, the day before Ocaña or whatever, is interesting because the Cav rolls are always going to be a tricky thing in Napoleonic and earlier struggles. So it's nice to highlight that. I don't think there's terribly much that's complex about the land system here, but if it's, you know, if it's the first time you're facing a system, there are some little quirks and everything in every system. And it's worth kind of playing something like this out to get a feel for how it works. It's not worth adding any of the optional rules, and it's not a terribly interesting scenario. I think the French actually should be able to win it if they can do what I did and manage to get this hex, as long as they keep funneling units into it. And something terrible doesn't happen, like their units break on their side of the turn so the Brits can move up. It doesn't end up as either an interesting simulation of what's going on, because there's not space enough to fall back and, you know, perform the kind of actual delaying action that would be in play. This is more some kind of weird race. And there's also not a terribly interesting game there, in the sense that it kind of revolves around a single luck factor that might come up multiple times, but it's really access to this space that becomes, you know, it is very dependent on what you're firing and morale rolls are and when they happen and stuff like that. So, you know, it's not one I would recommend to anyone to play for any real purpose other than as a training scenario. However, you know, it's not expensive in terms of the game design. They used up this much page, you know, a couple paragraphs worth of space. The print's pretty large in these books, so it takes up more paper, and thankfully the print's large. My eyes are going so bad. I'm reading 1841's rules, and man, I think I need my reading glasses for them, and I, you know, usually can read things, but it's tiny, tiny print. All right, I'll be back with a review at some point.